NEA Report, and this is NEA Live Events, brought to you by NEA Baptist, making our community better together. I'm Stan Morris reporting here this afternoon. We're in Walnut Ridge, and we are in the Spider's Web bookstore. It's on Main Street. If you're in Walnut Ridge and you haven't been here before, or if you're just driving through today, you have got to stop in and check this cool place out. It's a local business that's doing some neat things, and one of those things today is a book signing with somebody that I guarantee you probably have. If you haven't heard the name, I know you've read his stuff. It's George Jared, the author of two books actually right in front of us here, Witches in West Memphis, the West Memphis 3, and the Creekside Bones, a book that we actually shared a story about not too long ago on the website, and I don't know, that was shared by hundreds, maybe thousands, I think, saw it, tens of thousands and even more. You got a huge reaction over that, didn't you?
Absolutely. I think we, I want to say it was like 50,000 page views plus.
Wow. And since we've done that, I know that you've had a lot of people reach out and express an interest in it, and we have too seen people express, to us they want to know more about this, and so maybe this is just like the perfect time. For those who don't know, George has been a reporter in Northeast Arkansas for how long?
I've been a reporter in Northeast Arkansas for probably 12, 13 years.
Wow, okay, so it's been a bit. And you've covered some of the most notorious and from crazy stories to heinous crimes to everything in between.
Yes.
A lot. That's sort of, your books are, it seems to me like at least the collection, especially the Creekside Bones, of some of the craziest ones.
Yes, I've covered probably a dozen or so capital murder cases through the years. Mm-hmm. I covered the West Memphis 3 case, which is, probably the most notorious legal case in probably state history.
Has to be.
And, I was told, there's been a lot of documentary films made about the West Memphis 3. Mm-hmm. And I was told by two different sets of documentary filmmakers that I had actually written more stories about the West Memphis 3 case than any other reporter in the world.
Oh, wow.
And so I did some research on it, and it turns out that was actually the case. And so I had a lot of experience in the courtroom that wasn't, in Arkansas, when you're convicted of a crime and you go to jail, the very last appeal that you could file, it's called a Rule 37 hearing. And during this Rule 37, you go into the courtroom and you throw basically every bit of evidence against a wall and hope that something will stick enough where a judge will say, hey, they need a retrial. And one of those things you can do is you can literally go in and say, hey, my attorney was inadequate or incompetent, and that's the reason why I'm in jail right now, or prison, I'm sorry. So what happened was they had hundreds of hours of Rule 37 hearings in this case, many years after the original trials were held in 1994. And so what happened was, starting in 2008, I started covering these things, and they would last for like week blocks at a time. Like there'd be a whole week in August where they would just bring in all these forensic experts from around the world. Some of the best DNA experts, some of the best psychologists, and people who are at the top of their lines in all these fields. Well, there were many days where I was literally the only person besides like maybe the judge, the attorneys, maybe one or two of the defendants in the courtroom. And so I had this wealth of experience. I had, in the courtroom doing all this, and it hadn't been written about, or the documentaries kind of went over it a little bit, but not really. So even a couple of the documentary filmmakers, one of which, Paradise Lost 3, it was nominated for an Academy Award.
Sure.
And I became very good friends with the directors of that film. And they both told me that you need to write a book. The experiences you have, it's a unique perspective, you need to do it. And so that's when I wrote Witches in West Memphis. And I tell people at the very beginning of the book, the first day I walked into the courtroom, I saw Jason Baldwin, I thought, hey, there's a famous child killer. This guy obviously did it.
You thought they did it going in.
Absolutely.
Because we all have our intuitions, but we're trying to be objective in our role as a journalist.
Absolutely.
Right.
You always try to be objective, but you also, most of the time when someone's arrested for a crime, they committed that crime.
Most of the time.
And when 2 juries convicted these guys, I thought, okay, 24 jurors, can't be wrong. The problem is that when you get different facts, you have to form different opinions. And as time went on, sitting in the courtroom day after day after day, when the prosecution could not explain all these glaring factual holes in their original story as to why these three or how these three did it, it started to become obvious to me that there was problems. But then when it started really going off a cliff for me is when I started talking to some of the original people who testified in the original trials. A woman named Victoria Hutchinson who claimed that she attended a satanic spot with Eccles and Misskelley, and she looked me straight in the face and said that she flat out lied during her testimony. She said she was facing a credit card fraud charge, and that the police had promised to get rid of it if she could help them in this case.
And that's a pretty typical tactic, I think, in law enforcement, is if you're facing a crime, bear down on the person and tell them, if you help us out against something more serious,
yes,
we can help you out.
Yes. It's a typical prosecutorial tactic as well. I mean, it happens, and it's and you know, in a lot of in a sense, it helps in a lot of cases. In this case, it didn't. Obviously, she and the thing that really got me about her testimony was she wanted to get on the stand during the Rule 37 and say, "Hey, I lied." Well, the judge at the time would not. They could not come to a conclusion as to whether she would have been committing perjury then or now.
Was this David Burnett?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Judge David Burnett, who later became the senator, and so they didn't know if she would be committing perjury then or now. If it was then, the statute of limitations had already passed. If it was now, she could technically be charged with perjury in a capital murder case. That's a serious thing. So they wouldn't allow her to testify. Of course, I made the suggestion, me personally, I said, why don't you grant her immunity? If the purpose of this whole exercise is to come to true justice, then grant her immunity, let her testify without the fear of being charged with a crime. And they didn't do that. She never testified. The problem was, though, is that she signed a sworn affidavit. It laid out exactly what happened. I mysteriously got a copy of that affidavit. I wrote a story about it, and so that's when I really started thinking, okay, one of your key witnesses is lied. Then I found out that another two girls who were at a softball game said they overheard Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin and several other people talking about the crimes, saying that they were going to do it. You know, they had two more kids they wanted to get before the police caught them. At least one of those girls, or I guess her mother or something like that, I was told by the prosecutor that she was about to come forward and say, hey, maybe I misheard or this wasn't true. So then I started thinking, okay, these witnesses are changing their stories. And then the DNA on top of that. And then just the very simple facts of the case. It's just so hard. If you just took the West Memphis three, the three guys, and what happened to them that day, where they're at, where they can verify where they're at and what they were doing, when you start putting that timeline together, you find how hard it really would have been for them to commit the crime. None of the three had a driver's license, and none of the three had a car, obviously. Mm-hmm. They lived 7 to 8 miles away from where the bodies were found. And so just the logistics of it, you know, in a 3.5 hour time period, they were supposed to have walked 8 miles, raped, killed, slaughtered these kids, which, again, and I also go into the book, too, the boys were not raped. That is a misnomer. People have thought that for many years. They were not. But these boys were slaughtered, and then the three guys walked back to the trailer park they lived in, all in a 3.5 hour period, cleaned up the crime scene, CSI style. Not one drop of blood was found at the crime scene. And this is another key element, too. They found many hairs at that crime scene. They've all been DNA tested. Those hairs do not match the three guys who went to prison. They match a lot of other people, but not those three guys. So at that point, you know,
there's a lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns. I state this in the book as well. A lot of people think that, you know, one of the stepfathers killed him, and it's plausible that one of them did. It's possible. I think there's enough evidence, you know, in the case to say that that's a possibility.
But you don't have to prove somebody else did it to establish there's a reasonable doubt.
Right.
That is the burden of proof.
Right.
And it from what you've introduced in just this discussion and also in your book and what has been introduced since, there's a great deal of reasonable doubt.
Extreme amount. And I tell people this. I interviewed Damien Eccles when he was on death row. He wrote me a letter in 2010, and I interviewed him. And I've actually talked to him a couple months ago in Little Rock. And I told him this when I was interviewing with him, that I don't know definitively that you didn't do it. And the reason is I'm a journalist. If I wasn't on the ditch bank when those bodies were dumped, I don't know if you were there or not. I said, but if I was, as a responsible juror, if I was on one of those juries, I could never vote to convict them because it's just irresponsible. And I've told people this, you know, we have a responsibility to society, even if sometimes a guilty person goes free, we have to make sure that we keep our society, our sense of justice can't be broken.
Yeah, you can't have more innocent. You can't put innocent people in jail at the expense of convicting somebody that just so happens to have a bad case.
Right. That's exactly right. And and of course, a lot of the people who think that the three guys did it, they always point to the Jessie Misskelley Jr. confession.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I thought, hey, he confessed. There's no way you confess to killing 3 kids. Well, I had an attorney's girlfriend one day. We were in court, and her and I were having a conversation about it when I still thought they were guilty. And she said, so what is the compelling piece of evidence that makes you think they did it? And I said, well, the confession, obviously. And she says, have you ever read the confession? I said, no, I haven't. And just for all those people out there, he confessed 4 or 5 times. That's all true. He did. He confessed multiple times. The problem is you can take each one of those confessions and line them up, and every one of them, there's problems. There's inaccuracies.
It changed?
Yeah, it changed. The confession changes each time. And I talked to his attorney about it. Now, the confessions do get better as they go along. They get more factual.
Mm-hmm.
And quite simply what happened was Jessie was in court and gleaned more facts. Like he was in court all day. It started to cement in his mind.
Yeah.
And so they always point to confession. I read the original confession. It was a joke. Okay, I'm telling you, I've read many, many confessions in many, many murder cases. And every one of them I've ever read, I thought, yep, that person did it. They know things that only the killer would know. He knew nothing. He gave them nothing. In fact, his confession was so bad, the afternoon that he gave it, they took the confession to a magistrate to get, arrest warrants, and the magistrate would not issue them.
Wow.
They had to take him back into the room, and they magically, some of the problems that the magistrate had got cleaned up. And the questioning was leading, like, hey, Jessie, did... he said the boys were killed in the morning on their way to school. And they said, well, Jessie, was it in the morning or was it like 10? And then he'd go, yeah, that sounds right. And then he'd go, was it 10 or was it noon? Could have been noon. Was it 3? I think it might have been 3. There's a dramatic difference between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
All over the place.
Yeah, and the original confession, he said they were tied with ropes. He's claimed that the boys were choked, which there was no injuries to their necks, amazingly, as many injuries as they suffered. And so when you start looking at the confession compared to the actual facts of the case, it was ludicrous to think that was a real confession. And so, but I still had a lot of blowback. People say, oh no, he confessed. So 2 years to the day, almost, after these guys were released from prison in 2011, a little girl named Jessica Williams was playing in her yard over around Gosnell. She disappears. Her dad looks out in the yard, she's gone. They start looking for her. They find her body the next day, 11 miles from her house, out around Half Moon. It's this very rural area in Mississippi County. They found her in kind of like a watery drainage ditch type area. Within 24 hours, her mentally indigent 17-year-old neighbor confesses to her murder. He says, I did it, and gives a confession. And part of that confession was, I can't remember if it was leaked or if we somehow got it, or if maybe they just gave part of the confession to us. And he had a $2 million bond set. He was in the Mississippi County Jail. I mean, it was a dead set match. There was only one problem that I had when I read through the facts in the case. And it was kind of hard because a gag order was put in, and so it was really hard to communicate. But there was one fact that always stood out to me in that case.
What?
Christopher Sal, the guy that they charged with the murder, he lived next door to her, and within 30 minutes of her being missing, was out with her dad looking for him, from what I was told. So he didn't have a driver's license, didn't have a car. He may have had a driver's license, but I know he didn't have a vehicle. I know that for a fact. So how did he drive 11 miles? How could he get 11 miles to dump her body but be back in time to help her dad look for her? Now, did he maybe had her stashed her body somewhere? Maybe he did it later that night. Who knows that?
And that's also a pretty bold criminal move. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not something that anybody could be incapable of, but it's not something that most people would be able to do.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, very few people, I would assume, have the sociopathic tendencies to dump a body and then go and feign concern next to the father of the body you just dumped.
Absolutely.
Not going to say, like you said, but again, that's something that it takes an incredible individual to pull off in the negative sense, incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we went through this for 8 months. He was in prison. He was languishing in there. And well, then they found one sperm cell on her body when they did the autopsy. One singular sperm cell.
That's very insane, actually.
And when they found that sperm cell,
yeah, no, go right ahead. We're just having a public discussion here. So ask questions if you want to, or jump right in.
No, just for my boyfriend told me to come by and get a signed book.
Yeah, go right ahead. Now you can. We can stop at any point, and you can go ahead and help people out. So let everybody know that's watching. We are here at a book signing at the Spider's Web in Walnut Ridge, and it's on Main Street, so you can come by and get a signed copy of the book.
Yes.
About to happen right now, I think. Right.
Which one did you want?
The other one.
No, these are the ones.
Oh, that's fine. I actually want both.
Okay. Excellent. That'll work.
There we go. So we were just talking about witches in West Memphis. Some of the questions I'm interested in asking George here in just a second, and I think that's going to be very interesting to have perspective on, will be why is it that a journalist was one of the ones to figure this out when the police did it? Because I think that's an important thing for people to consider.
Let's see. Hey, Penny.
But if you would like to come by here, we're going
How
to
do
be
you
here
want to do
until
this as far as paying? I mean, I can take it and we can figure out how.
It's up to you.
Okay.
Why don't you sell to her, and then I'll buy leftovers for the store.
Okay. That'll
Do
work.
that work? Does that work? Okay.
Well, she'll have to do it. Can you?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
There you
you.
go. Thank you.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
That's the business. You know, anytime somebody wants to come by and get a book signed, or you can sit down and hang out with us and ask questions. That's all. It's all within the parameters of what we're doing today. George is sitting by a bunch of stuff. You can go ahead and talk to her. It's okay. This is informal.
Oh,
I was just
see you, sweetie.
have fun.
All right. Hey, keep your phone on.
Okay.
George has a daughter. We have families too. I don't. All of my families. I ate them. No.
So anyway, they found the one sperm cell on her body. They DNA tested it, and it did not belong to the guy in prison.
So instantly, reasonable doubt.
Instantly, because now it was at that point. Now I started contemplating what could have happened in this circumstance. Okay, so what would be a reasonable thing?
Yeah.
Well, maybe he was an accomplice, or maybe he, there was a rumor going around that maybe he took her to someone else and they sexually assaulted her, and then she said she was going to tell, and that he killed her to keep her quiet.
A lot of theories involved that kept involving him.
Yeah. And the problem was, though, is that at this point, the sperm cell doesn't match, and he was recanting his confession now, and finally they found that his sperm cell matched another neighbor, a guy named Freddie Sharp III,
Okay.
and they were unassociated with one another. So Freddie had like kids kind of around her age that had played with her, and so what happened is he had abducted her off her bike and raped her and killed her. Now, he has never been charged with her murder at this point. I mean, I've talked to the prosecutor about it several times, and
Hello.
how are you?
We're just chatting about. No, you're quite all right. You don't have to be quiet. You can ask questions too. We're just talking about the book. So,
Okay.
yeah. Do you want to get?
Yeah. So he was charged with the rape, and he was convicted. He's been in jail for 25, or he'll be in prison for 25 years.
And this is the gentleman that they found.
The sperm cell.
Okay.
Yes. And so they've still never charged him with murder. The prosecutor, I think at some point they probably will. I think they were letting this other process play out. But he is in jail for 25 years. But I always point that out because they had to release the other guy and flat out definitively said he falsely confessed. And it's the same judicial district in which the West Memphis 3. So
Second?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's it. And so I just thought it was very ironic
Who's
that
the prosecutor on that one?
Scott Ellington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he was actually the prosecutor who adjudicated the West Memphis 3 case, so he's been on both. And, Scott and I have talked about both these cases, and, he's a prosecutor. He's very passionate about his prosecutions, and, I always point this out to West Memphis 3 supporters, and they need to remember this. They attack Scott a lot, but if it were not for him, those 3 guys would still be in prison for a couple. They would have spent a couple more years in prison.
Yeah, they would have got out. Probably.
Yeah, they would have eventually gotten out. Yeah, there is no doubt that if they had a retrial, that they were going to. I've talked to the judge who would have been over the case. I mean, it's blatantly obvious they would have gotten out. And Scott even made a comment at the time. He figured they would get out too because of stale evidence. Witnesses changing their stories. But I mean, I always thought it was interesting though that when people say, "Oh, they're changing their stories because they want to be a part of this West Memphis 3 thing." Well, the problem is that I don't know anybody who really made any fame or fortune off of that. The witness part of it, and the other part is you would be admitting that you lied in a capital murder case that sent a guy to death row. I mean, who would want to live with that?
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I know a lot of people out there are probably wondering, why did this journalist figure it out and why didn't the authorities?
This is the thing about being like a prosecutor or a police officer. I've been around these guys for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, politicians, just people in power. They become so imbued with what they believe. Like when they find a suspect, that person did it. There's no doubt in their mind. And part of the problem is that not the problem, but our system, we have a high test. If you commit a crime, you got to jump a pretty high box to get convicted, and that's good. We have to prove it. It's not like Russia, where they just, if you say something they don't want, they just throw you in a cage and say, "Hey, you're a criminal." So here we have a high test. Well, when you have that high test, that means you really have to push the limits of investigating, of prosecuting, of you have to collect evidence. I mean, everything has to be done. So they form a strong belief system at every single level. And I'm telling you, I've had conversations with especially prosecutors who I know we know they're wrong to a certain degree about something. And even the minorest of details. And I've had lunch with them. I mean, the minorest of details, they will never admit that could be different or wrong than their theory.
It's hard to admit to being wrong in that position.
Yeah.
It's political, but it's also...
Oh, it's political.
There's criminal justice involved. And so,
yeah.
I know that we have a guest here. You have any questions? Would you like to get a book or get one signed? Or?
I need a book.
Go right ahead, yeah. We just reached a good pause point, so...
There you go.
Okay, why aren't you a doctor?
That looks like a doctor's signature, doesn't it?
Do I pay you or do I go and
You can pay me here. It's fine. If she got a credit card, she can pay in there. So.
Well, no, I'll pay cash today. Just for your information, I grew up in West Memphis.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
How about that? So were you living there when all this stuff happened?
No. But I traveled with a person who was the counselor at the school that the 3 little boys attended, and my
Yes.
sister also had worked at that school. And then I traveled with a couple of people that had Jason and Damien in high school. I don't want to be on a camera though or anything.
We're aimed over here.
Can you erase that?
Sure, we will.
But,
so tell us a little more. What happened?
Well, it's just a couple of the people that I traveled with that taught at Marion, they have mixed feelings. There's 1 or 2 of them that are absolutely positive that they were involved. And then there's one of them, particularly for Jason, that doesn't think there's any way he could have been,
Yes.
involved, that he's the least likely, And then there was a little boy witness that says he saw them do it, that was
Aaron Hutchinson.
their age,
Yes.
of
And actually, his accounting though was so inaccurate and so terrible that he wasn't even called as a witness.
I know, but he had this little boy, and I don't remember if that was his name or not, but he went to school with the ones that were killed,
It was Aaron.
and he talked to this counselor friend of mine,
Yeah.
and said he had seen it and everything. But anyway, it's sad, and I think the police screwed up.
Now, did you read Witches in West Memphis?
I have read it. I've read The Devil's Knot.
You read that? Okay.
I've read all of that. But yeah, I just think the police screwed up.
Well, I think that's one about anybody.
She's really smart. She's a former Quiz Bowl coach, and I love Quiz Bowls. So
Are you really? I used to love hanging out with the Quiz Bowl.
Yeah.
When
In
they
fact,
were
I think I had teams that played against him, except I didn't know it at the time. So
see, I was so like nondescript. I didn't do anything,
No.
so I wasn't worth remembering.
No, it was just that, when you're the coach of one team, you're concentrating so much on
Yeah.
what they're doing, you don't
Yeah.
pay that much attention to
Sure.
who's on the other teams. But
Unless they're just
anyway.
going nuts. Yeah. That's right.
But really, George's book just kind of confirmed what I thought.
Really?
So, and like I said, I think that one of the major mistakes was that gas station where somebody went in and bloodied it up. And how did the police investigate it? They went through the drive-through.
Incomprehensible.
I know, yeah. I
That's-
just, and I can understand they were busy because they had 3 little boys that were killed. But,
And it was the same police officer who responded to both calls because they were so close in proximity. And she didn't bother to go in the bathroom and collect the blood.
No.
And then
And
Brian
then-
Ridge, the detective who coaxed the confession out of Jessie, actually went into that bathroom the next day and collected blood flakes off a wall and then lost them so they couldn't be analyzed.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah, so just crazy.
A lot of incompetence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll look forward to reading this.
And I know you'll tell me what you think.
Oh, of course I will.
Thank you so much.
He knows me pretty well.
I do know you pretty well.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Good
Yeah.
to see you too, and thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
So you can come by and get a signed copy of either book as well if you'd like to. We're going to be here until 3, I think. Is that
Yeah.
right? This is NEA Live Events, brought to you by NEA Baptist, making our community better together. And the NEA Live Events series is something that's kind of newer, that we're going to be going all around Northeast Arkansas, really. This was one that I wanted, as soon as I saw it on the schedule, I had to come here because I wanted to ask you about a bunch of questions about the books, but also I knew that other people were going to come in and ask questions that I don't think of. And I'm interested, like when she said they're talking about that, that's what an interesting perspective, bro.
Yeah.
Around here, you might know somebody that was connected, and you may have heard a story. Like myself, I heard stories from a state trooper that was guarding one of the young defendants, and they influence you because, but really, I mean, we're all influenced by what we hear. We're just others'
Right.
perspective. So, the witches in West Memphis, we talked about. I mean, it's very. I would say, am I correct in saying you don't think they did it?
No, this is the way I state this.
Okay.
Based on the evidence in the case, I could never vote to convict these guys. I can never definitively say anybody did or didn't do anything that I didn't witness myself, and that's a responsible journalistic perspective.
Right.
If you ask me my personal opinion, I would say no, because the problem is in this case, you in any murder case, you have to have evidence. And I don't know that there's any evidence in this case that ties them to the crime. I mean, the problem is when people ask me, there has to be evidence, some. I say no. There's not. There's no physical evidence, no DNA, none of the tests that you would have to convict somebody of a crime. They don't exist here. They point to the Jessie Misskelley Jr. confession. If you believed every single word of that confession, let's just say he confessed and he did it and that was okay, then at the very least, or at the very most, you could put him in prison for admitting to killing those kids.
Sure.
You could not do it based on the other two. I mean, if I go and commit a crime and I say, hey, Stan, you did it with me, that doesn't mean you did it.
Yeah.
It just means I said you did it.
Exactly. There has to be some proof.
Right, there has to be proof, and there is no proof in this case. So, from my perspective, I don't think they did it. I mean, I just...
So, and really, I guess the appropriate question would be beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, could you convict them beyond a reasonable doubt? Because that's really the question we're asking, I think.
Right.
Of course, all of us want to know who did it, and we'll never know. I mean, at this point, I don't think we'll ever know, unless there's some, crazy, wild discovery. Speaking of, did you see or go into any more about those, whatever they were, diaries or books that it was on the Region 8 News report that were found in some locker?
Yeah, I saw that.
I saw a thing where Damien had commented on his page that was not his, that they were fake.
Yeah, I don't know that they probably are books from Varner, whether Damien Eccles, I mean, the only thing that raised an alarm with me when I saw it was I don't know why Damien Eccles would be taking books out of Varner. I mean, because I'm sure he wasn't able to take books in. They couldn't.
No.
Which I may be wrong. Maybe they could. Maybe his wife could send him books, and
Right,
maybe he
right,
read
but
them.
I mean, I would suggest it would be a little bit of an exception. But
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know enough about that particular case of finding those books.
I know they're on eBay.
Yeah, I mean, and who knows?
That's,
I mean,
I would suggest indicative of a motive that could potentially be there or potentially not.
right?
But something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the Creekside Bones,
Okay.
because this one is you span a whole bunch of different crime stories in this one.
Yes.
And they're all stories that we all remember, and some of us more than others.
Yes.
Just take us through it and take us through the start.
Okay, well, and I'll mention this. One thing I didn't mention about this
Yeah,
book,
go ahead.
which is in West Memphis, the first murder case I covered as a journalist was the Rebecca Gould case, and that's this young woman here. She was a 22-year-old college student, and I was there the day they found her body, and it was the first case I ever covered. To this day, it's an unsolved murder. I've written a lot about this case through the years. I'm friends with her dad, Dr. Larry Gould in Mountain Home, really good guy. And so when I wrote this first book, it was about the West Memphis Three, but I included a prologue about her case because I really would like for some resolution there. I think the case can be solved. And I've talked to the state police quite a bit about it. It's something that I've really pushed on. So in my second book, I give an update on that case. I always get a lot of interest. A lot of people will call me, message me on Facebook about that case, and so I try to keep them informed as much as I can. There have been some new developments in that case, and so I included them. The Creekside Bones is kind of an anthology of some murder cases I've covered. I kind of have a theory. I was a newspaper guy for a really long time. I'm with a media group now called Talk Business and Politics. We're based in Little Rock, and we cover, politics and business stories all over the state. But I did have this strong background in covering these murder cases. And so what I did is I had an idea that I was just going to take like a chapter and just write about one murder case because I know a lot of these people, I think people have shorter attention spans these days, and so so writing some long epic book about one murder case I thought was probably too much for most people. So I divided this book into chapters, and each chapter is a murder case that I've covered.
Oh, that's great. That's easy for this day and age, right?
Yeah, it's perfect, And I tell people, it is an anthology. All the stuff in here was stuff I wrote about, stuff that the Arkansas Times wrote about, Democrat Gazette, Now, some of the details, some news organizations won't give all of the gory, salacious details. I opted to go ahead and do that because it's not my job to tell a reader what they should consume.
Yeah.
My job is just to let them have it, and if they want it, they can take it. If they don't,
There could be an accidental relevant
Yes.
detail that gets left out to
Yes.
somebody that knows something that might turn around and help.
yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And that's another reason why I keep writing about Rebecca Gould, is because at some point I just feel like there's going to be one person come through with one bit of information that changes that whole case. So I wrote the Creekside Bones. The first case is the Green murder case, or the Elliot murder case up in Dalton.
Dalton.
Yeah, Dalton, Dalton, a little town in Randolph County, up in the northern sector of the town, right close to the Missouri border.
Funny enough, a town that I halfway grew up in because my father had farms up there.
Yeah.
In between growing up there in Pocahontas, and during this whole time, we were on the farm.
Yeah.
Every week, every night, every weekend when these murders happened.
Yes.
Probably 2 minutes from where they occurred.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and the story is, this family of four. I tell people you can't write a horror movie worse than what happened to that family. It was a dark, rainy night, and as a matter of fact, today is the anniversary of when their bodies were found 19 years ago.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a weird coincidence.
Yeah.
So it's dark, rainy night.
Dark, rainy night, knock at the door.
And this is for rural area.
Yeah.
of our. I mean, the roads. There are barely any paved roads up there, especially during the time that this happened. You are driving on gravel to get anywhere close to this.
And Stan, it is so rural that they had a tavern that was built in the early 1830s that was in some vegetation, and no one even knew that this was a tavern built in the 1830s. And they believe that this tavern's been restored by BRTC in the last couple of years. Somebody found it, and they believe it's the oldest structure west of the Mississippi River that's still on its original foundation.
No way.
Yeah, the Looney Tavern.
It's the oldest structure west of the Mississippi
River.
That includes California?
Includes everything.
Wow.
Yes.
Sounds like the police are here to get me. So, no.
I was in an ambulance, so you don't need that just
Never
yet.
mind, I'm good.
So just to paint a picture of how rural this is, I mean,
It couldn't be
that thing
anymore.
is hiding.
No joke.
What else is hiding out there?
Yeah, exactly.
And so they get a knock at the door. It's a rainy night. A friend had his car had broken down next to the river. The father goes down there to help him fix it. He gets shot, killed, thrown in the river. The killer or killers come back to the house, and they proceed to ruthlessly slaughter the mother and the little boy. And the killer or killers took the little girl.
How did they kill the mother and the boy?
The boy, his head was crushed like an eggshell with a tire iron. They jammed the pointy end of the tire iron through his throat, and he bled out on the floor. I mean, it's
wow. And to think a human being is capable of that, they had to be on some kind of meth or something.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I can tell you right now, it is one of the most horrific. I mean, it's soul crushing to think that happened to that little guy.
Unbelievable.
And then the mother, she was, just beat she was just beat up with this tire tool. There was so much blood. I mean, one of the detectives who worked it told me it looked like it was like a bloodbath in there. He said there was blood on all the walls, everywhere. And the mother, they thought the killer or killers thought that the mother was dead. And then the little girl, they had an 8-year-old girl named Felicia, and she was hiding underneath her bed. And the killer or killers went in there, dropped the tire tool on her stuffed animals. There's a picture, and they took her. They put her in the back of the father's car, wrapped in a blanket. And as they were getting ready to leave, they saw something crawling across the yard in the rain, in the darkness, and it was the mother. She woke up. And as she was crawling, she was trying to get to her parents' house. Her parents lived next door to them. She gets all the way to their porch. There's a bloody handprint on the door when her killer comes up behind her and slashes her throat from one end to the other, and she bleeds out on the deck. I mean, and the autopsy photos are, they are soul crushing. There's no other way to say it. I mean, the amount of empathy that I have for the family, it was hard covering those capital murder trials. And then the little girl, they found her bones in a creek a couple years later. She was supposedly or allegedly kept in a barrel for a couple days in a garage. Alive, and brought out to do whatever heinous, horrible thing they did to her. And
Pause on that for a second.
Sure.
How about that?
He wants to meet you, George.
Hi, I'm George. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. My mom told me about you, and I like real horror and stuff.
Okay.
Murders.
Well, it's nice to meet you, bud.
Yeah, you too.
Where are you from?
Arkansas. From
Okay.
here.
Oh, from Walnut Ridge?
Yeah.
Oh, what grade are you in?
Going to 7th.
Going in 7th? Okay. Well, you know Miss Jared then.
Huh?
You know Miss Jared?
I don't go to school here.
Oh, where do you go to school at?
Some. I used to go to Black Rock until they closed.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Well, my wife's aunt used to teach at Sloan.
What's her name?
Her name is Bobby Duncan.
My friends know her.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
And then, do you know Mr. Winston? He teaches math up there in high school.
No.
Okay. Well, you'll get to know him here pretty soon because he'll be one of your teachers. But he's a friend of mine. In fact, I think his daughter graduated. She was a valedictorian last year. Courtney.
I don't know.
Actually, that's her right there.
Really?
She was a valedictorian at Sloan Hendricks.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
So we're here live in Walnut Ridge, and if you'd like to come out, we're going to be here until 3 at the Spider's Web. You can come by and check out the place, get a signed book, come by and meet the author of probably more crime stories than most of us ever remember reading. That's neat. That was cool.
Yeah.
And if you do want to come by and meet George, that takes precedence over what we're doing. So we'll give you a chance to meet him. We'll take the camera off of you. I know a lot of people don't want to be on camera. That's fine. So back to the story, back to this horrendous, heinous act. I mean, you said she's kept in a barrel.
Yes.
I mean, the people that did this, I'm trying to imagine them, right? Like, I'm trying to imagine what are they doing right now? What is their life like? How they know they were involved. They know they did this. How do they live with themselves? How does their family, knowing that these people, because they're not the only one that knows it. People don't keep secrets.
No, they don't.
You can't keep secrets. People have they leave trails. They want to tell people about this stuff.
Stan, I'll tell you one thing that I learned in this business that is mind blowing to me, is that even when people do the most heinous, horrible thing, they tell other people about it.
Guaranteed.
They always do. It's a human trait. We can't keep anything to ourselves. We tell people.
And with this having the notoriety, somebody has bragged to somebody else.
Oh, yes.
I'm the one.
Yes.
I mean, if somebody out there, that person needs to be off the earth.
Yes.
So if somebody out there ever has a chance, please, it could be your own kid, your own husband. Don't hesitate.
Yes. And in that case, it took 5 years to even get an arrest. I mean, that happened on the night of or early morning of, like, July 28th to 29th, 1998. And which is very ironic that we're doing a book signing today. And I actually did not realize that until this moment.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
And in fact, I'll have a book signing at Barnes & Noble on August 19th, which is the anniversary of the West Memphis 3 getting released from prison.
Is it?
Yes.
How about that?
So that is kind of...
We've got some stuff, we will have some stuff on the website about that next week, by the way, everybody. So we got the release. So.
Excellent. And as far as that other case goes, it was a father and son that were arrested. They were Billy and Chad Green. They were, in 2004, they went to trial. Chad copped a deal with the prosecutors. He testified against his dad. Dad got death row. He got a conviction. He was thrown on death row. And then Chad got 37 years. Well, the case was overturned by the Arkansas Supreme Court. And so what happened was they were going to go back to trial again. Chad decided he wasn't going to comply this time.
I remember this.
And so this was like a huge legal battle. His attorneys were arguing that it's double jeopardy to try to recharge him, because that's what the prosecutor told him.
Yeah.
He said, if you don't adhere to this deal again, we're going to charge you with 4 counts of capital murder and 2 separate counts of sexual assault. Not even involved in this case, where he, raped an 8-year-old girl.
Well, this guy's a real winner, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a piece of work. And so eventually they decide that they're going to charge both of them. The courts say, if you break your plea deal, then the original charges still stand. So they go to court again. They go to trial. I mean, the details they're mind-numbing.
Yeah, just awful.
It's I've been in a courtroom a lot, covered a lot of cases, and that one, it bothered me for a long time. What happened to that family, and I want to make I also want to make this clear too in these books. There's a lot of content in here, a lot of really gory, nasty details.
Yeah.
These details are all supported by public documents, police reports. Transcripts of the trial. So I mean, the details are hard to deal with, and I've had some blowback from some family members.
Sure.
And I understand.
Get it every time.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I apologize to them. I said, look, it's tough. The problem is that there are people who were murdered.
Yeah.
And anytime, not just me, anybody, when we tell their stories, they get to live a little longer.
Well, here's what I would think, and there's a lot of approaches to that. But if I was personally to be brutally murdered, I would want the story to be told in as excruciating detail as it could be, because I would want people to be able to most empathize with that, and of course the goal being somebody that might go one way in life reads that and realizes they could never bring somebody to experience that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of benefits to, but also it could be a detail about a knife. It could be a detail about the type of wound.
Right.
It could be something that somebody says, hey, I've seen that before while we were out hunting, cleaning a deer or something, because again, that's half the reason why I would spend time up in Dalton. That's just what we're talking about. You never know what detail, right? I mean, it could be
absolutely.
It could be that detail you leave out that somebody clicks, even if it's that gory one.
And actually, I can actually give you a great example of that in my Witches in West Memphis book.
Mm-hmm.
One of the stepdads claimed in a federal deposition that he had never seen his stepson the day of the murders. That he came home from work, and the stepson and his friends were already gone. He never saw him that day. Well, no one knew that he thought this because he was never interviewed by police during the original investigation, which is mind-boggling because he is a. Because.
That's more my thing.
Hi there. How are you?
Pretty good.
Give me a sign that.
If you could sign it for
Sure.
a new fan, Alicia Phillips, for my wife.
Excellent. How you spell Alicia?
ALICIA.
ALICIA.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
You have a great one.
Hey, you too.
So, I'm trying to. Okay, where are we at?
We were talking about the
details.
The details,
Yeah.
and this one minor detail came out of that deposition because what happened was the stepdad he sued Natalie Manners from the Dixie Chicks because she publicly proclaimed that he was actually the West Memphis 3 killer, and so he sued her and he lost. In fact, the court found that he had to pay her $20,000
Wow.
to cover her fees.
Wow.
Yeah, so and I always tell people this: you can try to sue somebody for any reason, but you better be careful because if it turns around on you, I mean, like with him, I mean, it seemed like a slam dunk case. She came out and said that he committed this heinous murders,
Yeah.
and she was the one that ended up having to pay her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they came to an agreement where that he didn't actually have to pay, but so anyway.
Taught him a lesson.
Taught him a lesson, yeah. So anyway, well, there was a detail that came out. He said he never saw the boys that day. Well, 3 women in 2008 came forward after they saw this in the federal deposition said, no, that's not true. We saw him motioning the boys into the house when we were on our way to church.
Why would he lie?
Yeah. Why would he lie about not seeing them? Yeah.
Right.
And why would they come forward and lie about?
Why would they lie?
Yeah. There's no reason to lie. And again, they had nothing to gain from coming forward. They just wanted the truth to be known.
Sure.
So these minor details sometimes turn into major facts.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why, nobody wants to put that stuff in there, and there are sickos that probably do, have some kind of joy from reading those graphic details. But you have to also remember that there's a lot more benefit from that, and you can't take something away just because there's some small percentage of exception that gets something bad from it. Creekside Bones, is that the crime that the title was taken from, I'm assuming?
Yes, Felicia Elliot, her bones were found in a creek in September of 2000. And so I titled the book after her just because that's where they found her.
Sure. Eventually, what happened with Green? Did he eventually... were the convictions, were they reconvicted?
Both guys were convicted. In 2011, Chad was convicted on 4 counts of capital murder, and
so they were able to convict him.
They convicted him and Billy Green. They both got life terms. A lot of people, the first question I'll get asked is like, how in the world can you slaughter a family of 4 in this brutal manner and only get life? Why aren't you on death row? The problem is and the prosecutor, Henry Boyce, a great guy, I really like him. Him and I sat down and talked about this one time, and there was a lot of family members. There wasn't much physical evidence in the case.
Yeah.
It was a lot of family members tying up the loose ends. Well, as you can imagine, Chad Green's mother had to testify. And when she testified, he told me that he wanted to be, if she was going to testify and lead to the death of her own son, she might not testify as truthfully as she might not have been forthcoming. It might have been a much more difficult proposition for them. So they were trying to thread a needle, and they threaded it. Now, I have a different theory in the case. I mean, I don't have any problem with these two guys being in prison. They earned it for many deeds besides just this case.
Sounds like it.
But I have a different theory in the case.
You don't think they did it?
No, I think it was Chad who did. Because I go through it, there's some statements that he made before the first trial to a private investigator and an attorney. Because you take these things in a vacuum, okay? I don't believe prosecutor, I don't believe defense attorney necessarily. I don't believe them. I know they're right about a bunch of things.
But you know they have agendas.
They have agendas. They're on this side, they're on this side. So then what you do as an impartial journalist is you come to the middle, and then you let the points of evidence move your needle.
Right.
Move the needle. And the problem is that the defense, now Billy's attorney flat out told me he didn't do it. And I'm like, okay, well, you're here. Prosecutor says, oh, he was the mastermind. You're here. Now you go to the evidence. That's where the needle starts in the middle. Okay, well, let's look at the evidence. Billy was a sophisticated criminal. Chad was not. Okay? This was not a sophisticated crime. The person who perpetrated this crime did it with a tire tool that they found in the trunk of their car, and it was haphazard. Because if you were going to kill Carl Elliot, the father, why would you go to the house where everybody can see? Like, they went to the house.
There's a lot better ways to plan it, you would think, than slamming a hard weapon against somebody until blood's everywhere.
Yeah. You see Carl was involved, and this is pretty well known. He was kind of involved in the drug trade with these guys. He was with them. There were many times when Carl was with them that he could have just disappeared, and no one could really prove what happened to him. Right. So you have a house full, 2 kids and the wife, and you got her parents living next door. To me, that's not a sophisticated crime at all. And so then you go to the second level of it. The person goes back in the house, wipes everybody out, and then takes the little girl. Well, Billy, I'm sure he may have been a pedophile. I don't know. But we do know one thing for a fact. Chad was a pedophile. He had been convicted of being a pedophile. And he had assaulted a girl the same age as Felicia. She was taken. So, in my opinion, Billy's a sophisticated criminal. If taking the little girl, if he had taken her, he knows that she is going to lead the police straight to them. So so that was always a problem I had, And is it possible he still did it that way? Yes. But there's other bits of evidence, and it's all in the book. If you just tie these loops together, I think it is possible that he may have killed her, though. I think he might have found out that Chad took her and then killed her later.
That's terrible. I mean, it's a terrible story, but going back to it and looking at it is just a necessity. It's part of the process. Tell me about some of the other stories. I know there's one I can't wait to get to.
Yeah, I'm sure. Another story in there, and this is kind of one that, again, touched heart-wrenching for me. Sydney Randall.
Oh, gosh.
She was a 15-year-old girl who lived here in Walnut Ridge. My wife was her teacher and knew her. I didn't know her real well. I'm not going to say that I knew her very well. I knew who she was. We had spoken a few times, and she was raped and murdered here in Walnut Ridge. They found her body a couple months in 2013. She vanished from her house. It was again dark night. Mom wakes up, goes to look for her. She's not there. She's gone, and the stepdad, John Cornell, they're both gone.
Wow.
And, of course, the mother panics. She calls her friends. She calls the hospital. She calls everybody she can, try to find her daughter. And no one knows where they're at. Well, she finally calls the police and says, hey, they're gone. I don't know what's going on. Well, he pulls back into the driveway right around this time. It's around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And there's always been a lot of confusion about that one detail. And the reason is time changed that night. Or there was a time change.
Well, that messes it up then.
Yeah, and so people would try to say that the mom was lying, and she wasn't lying. There was a time change.
Yeah.
And So
Which actually, I don't think it happens actually at midnight, does it? It happens at like 3 a.m. I think.
yeah, it's something like that.
Weird, so.
Yeah, and if you don't remember to change your clocks, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So he pulls back into the driveway, and she said, "Sydney's missing. Do you know where she's at?" And he said, "No, that's bullshit stuff." And he drives away. He says he's going to go to the police and file a report. Well, a day and a half later, they find his body just outside of Walnut Ridge in a field. He had shot himself, and there was a lot of speculation that someone else had something to do with the girl's murder, that it wasn't him. And in the book, I tried to clarify that, from the vantage point of reading through the investigative file, which I have, reading all the witness statements, from people who gave statements to police. And then the evidence that was collected, I say in there that, I think he was the one that did it, and I don't think anybody helped him, because there was always speculation that family members and all that. And I tried to assuage those theories, because I just don't think they're accurate. And I have a lot of sympathy, and this is something that we don't talk about a lot in the media. The guy that committed the murder, okay? And there's no doubt about that. I mean, her DNA was found on his body.
Yeah, it's no chance.
There's no chance. I mean, he did it. And but there's other victims in this too, and a lot of those victims are his family. I mean, they don't want to believe he did it, and I don't blame them. I mean,
sure. Nobody wants to believe somebody they love is capable of that. But that's a big bias that you have to dismiss if you're being objective. Yes,
exactly. That is well said. And so through the course of the years, I've had to deal with these families. I've had to talk to them, and I try to be a sympathetic figure.
Sure.
But at some point the rubber hits the road, and you have to understand this case. Some of the Green murder trials, not a slam dunk. Not a slam dunk. I mean, those guys could have walked out of that courtroom, and as an objective, unbiased observer, I would say, you know what? Maybe didn't have it.
Yeah.
Maybe didn't have it. Maybe couldn't get there.
Sure.
That case.
There are those cases that
Yeah.
I'm objective. I don't have a bias. I mean, in a sense,
Yes.
I don't care one way or another, except for the truth and justice. That's really, as a journalist going in, that's the only thing we care about.
Yeah.
And so you see that, and you land on that side of it. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much a slam dunk.
Right.
I mean, her DNA was found on his body. There's pretty significant evidence that he had been molesting her. And it's, again, the details are salacious. They're in the book.
Sure.
And I always say this. I had somebody tell me, a woman contacted me one time, and she said, "I can't believe that you would write about this stuff." And I'm not just talking about my books. I'm talking about like as a journalist.
Sure.
And I always say this: I don't ever have to write about another murder again. If another one never happens, the happiest person in the world will be me.
I would love that.
Yeah, because it numbs your soul.
It's not easy for us.
No, I mean, I've got a story in here about a woman who vanished, and I'm telling you where they found her and the condition they found her in. Nightmare. Literally, you could not watch a horror. I mean, these are real things that happen to real people.
The A&E shows are based off of.
Yes. And I mean, where this guy decided to hide this 21-year-old woman's body.
No, and I think as somebody that's reported on, I would say less murders than you have, but a number myself too, you always become invested in the story emotionally.
Yes.
And so, but it's just that your investment is a different type. It's an objective, unbiased approach to try to find the truth, because we're writing history.
Yes.
And you want history to get the story right.
We write the first draft of history.
Exactly. And so, it does. I mean, there's times I've sat down, written stories about a murder that you're in, I'm in tears by the time I'm done. But
done it.
It's not. There's a greater good that's served by it, and so I understand people's emotions, but also this is not about we're certainly not getting rich on this.
No, that's
You know.
that's another misnomer. If you want to make a lot of money, you don't need to be a journalist
No.
or be an author, because trust me.
I have people ask me, should I get into journalism? And I hate to say this, especially on a live stream, but my general response is no. You shouldn't, because it's not a good field for most people. It's incredibly full of pressure.
Yes.
You can't make a single mistake without the world ending around you, and that's part of the job. And mistakes matter so much more in this field than you'll ever,
Right.
have in another part of the world.
I tell people, like every now and then, like I'll misplace a comma, or there'll be a typo in a story or something, and inevitably I'll have an English teacher or someone like that come up to me, send me a message. Oh, you made this mistake, and I tell people, imagine a world where every single thing you do in your professional life is available for thousands of people to critique it.
Impossible to be perfect.
Impossible.
And when you're writing, like for me, there's plenty of days that I probably pump out 5,000 to 10,000 words.
Yes.
When you're writing that much, if you make a mistake 0.1% of the time,
Oh, yeah.
everybody sees it, and you don't know how to spell.
Yeah.
According to the internet.
Yeah, you're an ignorant buffoon.
Right. Which I actually am. But there's more. There's a lot more stories though. I would just go back to the book for a second, because there's one that I mentioned, and I'm sure people are wondering why. There's a story in there, Bob Castleman.
Yes.
I don't want you to tell every story, every detail, but I do want to know. I want people to know a little bit about him, because I'll throw my 2 cents in relation to that
Sure.
too. But Bob Castleman was in Randolph County a very successful legal principal. I mean, he was involved in the prosecutorial sense. He was involved in the defense attorney sense.
He was a prosecutor. I believe he served a stint as a judge for a
Right,
while.
I think so.
From what I was told, very good law student. I think he graduated from the U of A.
And incredibly nice. I actually, full disclosure, knew him. He was an attorney for me when I was a little kid, and when my father passed away, and there was an estate that had to be battled over, and Mr. Castleman was my attorney.
Yes.
On my behalf, at least, because I was 14. But so I knew him. He was always real, he had a lot of arrowheads, but he was really nice.
Yes, very nice guy. From what I've told, I personally never met Bob, and the one thing about that story in this case, I wrote stories about Bob, but they were largely based on court documents. The stories I wrote. At the time, I was working for a newspaper in Jonesboro, and I wasn't able to go to Little Rock every day to cover a lot of the stuff that was going on with him. So I didn't. It's kind of that one's a little bit of a weirder one for me, because I really wasn't intimately involved in the courtroom. But his case is interesting. I mean, there's no way around it. It's one of the most interesting cases you're going to find. And basically, he went from this very prominent attorney. He just went down. I mean,
Free fall.
Free fall. That's the best way to describe it.
Fallen further in society.
Yeah.
You work a long time. I think the peak you can get to is you're a member of the community that's well thought of, and you have a good business, and life is comfortable. But if you take a look, it was just a handful of months. It seems like, or years.
Yeah,
it went
a couple
from
of years.
To,
he got into a dispute with one of his neighbors. And it nearly led to the death of his own son, who was nearly shot to death. And when the police weren't going to charge them with a felony crime, he mailed a live copperhead snake. It made international news. And this snake popped out of this box when the lady opened it, and it was right.
Biter.
Yeah, it was right there.
Yeah.
I believe it was a couple of inches from her face. It was right there. Throw it out there. Well, of course, when you mail something like that through the mail, that's a federal crime.
Yep.
And so he went to federal prison for that. And then I believe his son went to federal prison as well over the whole ordeal. And then he got out, and he didn't have a law license anymore. He wasn't making all that money. And so eventually he became, a notorious drug dealer. He was he had a farm in southern Randolph County, and they were making meth.
Meth out in rural Randolph County.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
That's very common.
Yeah, and so then he kind of devolved, into this character. He was He had all the, like you said, he had elaborate collections of Indian arrowheads and these things, and you know, he claimed insurance on them, and then he got an insurance fraud charge over that because he tried to claim they'd been stolen or something had happened.
Why
to
do
him.
meth heads have so many arrowheads?
Actually, I did a story about that one time.
Did you really?
I did.
Because that's interesting to me.
Yeah, because I've been on a lot of drug raids.
Yeah.
You know, where people go in and
They have them all the time.
every one of them.
Like it's almost funny.
Yeah,
It really is.
It's strange. There was one. I was doing a story about a drug bust in Paragould one time, and it was unbelievable. And this house was just trashed.
Yeah.
And they had some, and then they have evidence. Like they'll bring everything out, and among the evidence, they had these just unbelievable Indian arrowheads, and I was like,
They're probably worth a lot of money.
they are worth money, especially good, nice ones. And so I asked some drug task force guys one time. I said, "Hey, what's the deal with these Indian arrowheads?" And they said, "Well, they can. When you get high on meth, you have like this ability to singularly focus. Like some of these, you'd be surprised. Some of these meth houses they go into are spotlessly clean
Yeah.
because they will literally spend 3 days not sleeping and cleaning the whole house.
Mine's not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You can tell I'm whatever that is. I'm on the
Right.
opposite of that. Only drain on my house is going down the drain.
Yeah, right. So I asked them, they said they will just wander into fields and they might spend days out there and grow crop
Days.
fields.
No, I
Days.
saw a police report not long ago where somebody come up on a woman that was laying in a rose bush or laying in a bush or something like that.
Yeah.
And like, gosh, I say this may be something you told me, but like she's laying in a bush and they're like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "I'm looking for arrowheads."
Oh, no, that wasn't me.
That was a year.
No.
Okay, now somebody this literally happened, and I mean, there's so many of these that happen, folks, that don't get reported.
Oh.
Because the media doesn't catch everything.
You couldn't do it. I mean, literally, when it comes to like, especially with drugs,
Yeah.
there's no way you couldn't.
No.
You could literally. Every media outlet in this area could hire one person to cover drug stories, and you would never cover them
do
all.
them all in one day.
Yeah, you couldn't.
No, I promise you. I've tried to come up with different methods of just listing the name and the charge. I mean, it's so difficult to get them all.
You can't.
So many people. And I'm not talking about marijuana here. I'm talking about meth. I'm talking about felony substances that
Yes.
are, I mean, just for lack of the philosophical discussion right now, the kind of stuff that does causes serious mental derangement and desperation to the level of a crime resulting.
Yes.
Because those are the ones that you really have to think about.
Yes.
And this now that brings us back. Crystal meth is one of those that causes people to do violent, insane actions.
Right.
Like nail a copperhead to somebody.
Right. And so he, and I'm not familiar with his amount of drug use at that time. So probably won't comment about that, but I've heard stories.
Sure.
And everybody has. I mean, when you're a reporter, I mean, I always think it's ironic. Every now and then I'll have somebody come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, I can't believe you, covered this, scandal over here, like the courthouse, or this scandal over here at the airport commission, but you're not. I mean, why do you care?" And I'm sitting here going. You remember, these are the things I write about. There's a whole lot of things I get told about that I never write about, and you really don't want to go down that hole.
Yeah.
Because it could just keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Sure.
So anyway, back to Bob. He was involved in this drug ring. The FBI busted him in 2011, 2012, and he went to jail or prison, and so there was 8 people involved. Well, as time went on, each of them started turning. They started, talking.
Flipping on him.
Yeah, flipping, turning, and making deals with prosecutors. And their goal, I mean, the U.S. attorney, it's obvious their goal was to get him.
Sure.
And so at some point, there was a guy named Travis Perkins. He was a guy who was involved in this ring. 3 days before he's supposed to go testify before, in a federal drug probe, he's found murdered in his apartment in Pocahontas. And so anyway, he was a guy that could tie all the loose ends in this drug ring.
And this is like mob hit level stuff.
Yeah, it was an assassination. Yeah.
He was assassinated.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so anyway, so to this day, no one's ever actually been charged with the murder. But what they did is they were able to tie Bob to the murder through witness statements and testimony in federal court. and they've tied it to him. Now he's in jail for 40 or 50 years. I can't remember the exact amount.
Rest of his life.
Rest of his life. Yeah, he's not getting out. And Henry Boyce and I have talked about whether he'll actually be charged on the state level with murder in that case. And Henry said that he's going to let the federal authorities decide if he'll ever be charged with that murder. Again, you know, there's a level of evidence that you have to reach, you know.
Sure.
But he's definitely.
And if he's never coming out of jail and you're not going to get a death penalty anyway,
right?
Do you want to spend $20,000 on a trial for the public's money that really doesn't do anything?
Yeah, it wouldn't serve any useful purpose.
Right.
I mean,
I
because
get that decision.
And federal time is not like state time. You're going to serve your time in federal prison.
You're there.
Yeah, you're there. You're going to serve your time.
Wish he would call me and let me do an interview with him.
Hey, if you wanted to do an interview with me, I'd love to.
That'd be great. I never understand why, everybody is innocent of every crime ever, but I never understand why they don't. I mean, if you're really innocent, like the greatest thing you could probably do is call a journalist and say,
if you are, yeah.
I will tell you everything. But if you're not innocent, that's probably the worst thing you can do too.
Yeah. Well, Billy Green was he was very he would go and do interviews with different outlets. He was very, and that's part of the reason why I think that he may be innocent of some of those murders is because when he got convicted.
Yeah.
I mean, I was right there. I talked to him 2 minutes after the conviction. They had a recess for a few minutes, and I went over and sat right next to him, and I said, I looked him straight in the face. He's like, I can't believe they just convicted me of this.
Wow.
And he was already going to be in prison for the rest of his life over drugs.
So he already knew.
But there was a genuine shock in his face, and you can't go by that. I mean, that doesn't prove anything.
But you're right. You have to consider it.
Yeah.
You have to consider it.
Yeah.
And we know people have been wrongfully convicted, or at the minimum, probably unjudicially convicted.
Yes.
I think that might be a better word for that.
Yeah.
In this area.
Yeah.
In this area, and that's detailed in books. So, I think we're coming to the kind of the end of the live stream here. I want to just kind of wrap it up, but for people out there, tell them one more time. I think where can they get the book if they can show up here or.
The book right now, I've got it at the Spider's Web here in Walnut Ridge. We've got copies here. It's at Barnes & Noble in Jonesboro. And I may have a few copies still. Actually, Dr. Gould, Rebecca's father, he carries some copies in his dental office because there's so many people interested in it.
Really?
And I also, you can get it on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version. You can, if you want to, you can contact me on Facebook at author George Jared.
Mm-hmm. We tagged you in this, by the way.
Yeah, send me a message. I will bring you a copy, and I'll sign it. And if you have any questions, and most reaction is positive, but every now and then I get negative reaction, and that's fine too. I don't mind the negative.
Sure.
Because it's kind of funny. When you write a book, the best thing you can do is find somebody who's going to be very honest and be very just crush your book.
Sure.
I mean, there's no other way to say it. Just crush it. Just tell you where all the flaws are, and the best thing you can do if you ever write a book is believe them, because if they read books, they know where the flaw. They'll tell you. And the best decision I made is I had several people edit my books, and I listened to every suggestion they had, and I made every change they told me to make.
No kidding.
Yes.
It's always good. I think that people don't realize sometimes that when you're able to willing to question yourself on not just ideas and your own decisions and your own life positions and stances, but in this case, in our case, what we can every day, our work, we have to. We don't have a choice.
Absolutely.
Other people that live every day that don't live objective lives where their mistakes are corrected for a living. I think that's sometimes why people have such a hard time admitting to being wrong, whereas in the journalism field, you see people more often than not that know the corrective process.
Yes.
And it's because we have to.
I think that's more of an advent of modern journalism.
Maybe, yeah, because of online social media
Right.
and instantaneous feedback.
Yes.
That's the world I'm used to.
Yes.
Because I came up in that journalism, that's even before web was as big as it is now, that's where I was doing my stuff. And you make one mistake, the web tells you. And if you
Big time.
argue with them, they tell you why you're wrong, why you shouldn't be arguing with them, and why your
Yeah,
tact is
and you
off
need to be
too.
very careful who you're arguing with because sometimes they're way smarter than you.
And it's good to check people's accounts too to see.
Yeah, make sure. Yeah.
Has this guy got a master's in history, or
Oh yeah, I will guarantee you. I used to get these emails from this mysterious person who had it was a fake account. I know it was an attorney who was arguing with me about this West Memphis 3 case, and I'm pretty sure it was one of the original prosecutors.
Really?
I can't prove it,
But it probably.
but their arguments were so legalistic. I mean,
I think that's probably indicative of somebody that maybe bothered to think they were wrong.
yes,
Because why else would you, if you were that educated, you don't take a personal stance in
You
something
shouldn't.
like this because it's all around you.
yeah. When you take an oath as a prosecutor, you take an oath to uphold justice,
Yeah.
not your opinion.
I mean, that's interesting. It's always interesting when somebody takes it personal. I like to know why.
Me too.
And
Some people do.
indeed. So they're both out right now. You can get them right now at the places you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of one other thing, I'm going to zoom in here on the Rebecca Gould poster and let everybody kind of get a good look at that because
And that's the original poster. In fact, the notes on the back of the poster are the notes I took the day that she disappeared.
you take that to all your signings.
Yes.
It would be incredible if this was the day that somebody saw a tip and decided to, or saw that and decided to share a tip.
I would love it.
George Jarrett here live with us. This is NEA Live Events. It's brought to you by NEA Baptist, making our community better together. Thanks so much to NEA Baptist for jumping on with this exciting new project. We get to go to these little corners and talk to people and see neat stuff, and we're in a new place that we've never been to before. This is kind of a look. We're in the back signing room, the book signing room, but up front, so neat. This place has coffee too, which I'm about to go get some more of.
Absolutely.
I love the coffee. They got a lot of neat stuff here. This is the Spider's Web in Walnut Ridge. It's on Main Street, is that right?
Yeah, Main Street.
Main Street, and you can come by here. We're going to be here how much longer? Where are we at right now in time? I don't know.
Check and see. We're probably got another half hour. Maybe.
Probably at least another half hour you can come by.
Yeah, I'll be here for another 30, 40 minutes.
Okay, great. So you still have time to come by and see us if you're watching this live. If you're watching it after the fact, as a lot of people will be, you got that signing coming up at Barnes & Noble.
August
That's on
19th.
August 19th, and more info will be on NEAReport.com about that.
I'm also giving a talk in Randolph County August 7th at the museum.
That's right, at the Randolph County Heritage Museum, and info on that is at NEAReport.com right now. I actually posted something on that, I think, last week or the week before. So more info on that. You can always search, by the way, on NEA Report. If you haven't, you can use the search box. Just type in George Jarrett and bring up everything you've got on the website about you. So that's it for us now. This is the little segment we call NEA Live Events. We're glad you could join us here on NEA Report. I'm Stan Morris reporting. Thanks a lot.